blue because of the extreme cold weather. Mayor Mamdani says during the storm, teams were scheduled.
Wait.
We begin tonight in San Francisco, where a mountain lion that's caused a whole lot of commotion over
Where tumbleweeds don't just grow in the desert, they take over everything around them.
Country 25 years ago. Ann Thompson joins me now. And what are local health officials there saying?
Across the United States, a disturbing pattern is taking shape. Not through a single catastrophe, but through a sequence of disruptions unfolding across land, weather, cities, and public health. Winter storms strike in relentless waves. The ground collapses without warning. Fire erupts in distant states within days of each other. Disease resurfaces where it was once thought defeated. And wild animals cross into spaces long claimed by humans. None of these events stand alone, and none arrive in isolation. Scripture warns that when signs converge, rather than appear one by one, they mark a season that demands discernment rather than dismissal. The question is no longer whether these events are connected, but whether anyone is willing to pay attention to what this convergence may be revealing. If this made you pause, like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to stay alert for what unfolds next. Winter did not arrive gently. The storm descended across a vast metropolitan region as weight rather than spectacle, pressing down until movement itself became deliberate. Snow did not fall and pass. It accumulated, hardened, and remained, rising into barriers that narrowed streets, erased sidewalks, and turned familiar routes into uncertain passages where every step required calculation. What covered the region was not light or forgiving, but dense, waterlogged snow fused with ice beneath it. The surface punished speed and mocked routine. Pedestrians slowed by necessity, not choice, as balance replaced confidence. Vehicles vanished beneath compacted layers that resisted both engines and shovels, while intersections across multiple districts lost their shape and definition. Transportation systems spanning the region failed together under shared pressure. Major roadways constricted until lanes no longer functioned. Public transit stalled or crept forward. Rail lines fractured into cascading delays. And regional air travel fell silent as departures disappeared from boards. A region built on momentum found itself suspended, not by isolated breakdowns, but by total convergence of strain. Cold followed the snow like a seal, locking damage in place and denying the relief of thaw. Cleanup slowed as machinery struggled against hardened piles, while crews faced exhaustion intensified by freezing air that turned time into an adversary. What should have been temporary disruption stretched into endurance, as neighborhoods waited for restoration that arrived slowly, if at all. Within that stillness, the human cost emerged with quiet severity. Storm-related deaths shifted the narrative from inconvenience to consequence. These were not abstract figures, but lives interrupted by conditions that escalated faster than caution could respond, reminding the region that vulnerability does not discriminate between systems or status. Routine collapsed across the area. Workplaces closed, schools shifted, supply chains slowed, and schedules dissolved into improvisation. The weight of the storm was felt not only in snow and ice, but in the sudden absence of motion that exposed how much stability depends on favorable conditions. Scripture speaks into moments like this with unsettling clarity. In Job 37:6-7, snow is not framed as randomness or punishment, but as command released so that people cease their labor and recognize a power beyond control. It is interruption, not chaos. That interruption was unmistakable. Without dramatic violence, the storm removed speed, silenced engines, and emptied corridors that rarely rest. It imposed stillness, where constant motion is assumed, revealing how fragile continuity becomes when conditions shift just beyond expectation. This storm was remembered not for intensity alone, but for duration, density, and consequence, layered together. Snow became barrier, ice became threat, cold became restraint, and time became pressure. It offered no explanation, only a pause, forcing endurance, and leaving behind a question heavier than the snow itself. What was meant to be recognized while everything stood still? The ground did not attack from above, nor did it descend with fury from the sky. This time, the threat came from below, rising upward to meet an urban coastal region where danger was least expected. The collapse did not feel like nature striking outward, but like the earth withdrawing its consent, quietly pulling away from everything placed upon it. There was no shaking, no violent rupture, no warning sound to trigger instinctive fear. A street simply vanished. What unsettled witnesses was not motion, but absence. Because the ground did not break apart in chaos, it opened, revealing a hollow that had existed long before anyone noticed. This region rests on porous ground that appears solid from above, but behaves differently beneath the surface. Water moves slowly and persistently, dissolving structure while leaving appearance intact. Cavities expand, layers thin, and support weakens without disturbing the routines above. Development continued with confidence, while the earth below quietly gave way. The collapse did not begin when asphalt disappeared. It began years earlier, unseen and unchecked. What appeared sudden was only revelation. The failure was not the surface itself, but the illusion of permanence. When the ground opened, certainty collapsed with it. Streets are meant to carry weight, not surrender beneath it. That expectation failed in an instant, exposing how much daily life depends on trust rather than verification. Traffic halted, boundaries dissolved, and familiar space became unrecognizable. Unlike storms or fires, this event offered no spectacle. There was nothing to flee from and nothing to outrun. The danger had already completed its work before it was visible. That quietness made it more disturbing, because it suggested that collapse does not always announce itself, and that warning signs do not always rise in time. Psalm 11:3 asks, "If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do?" It speaks not of chaos, but of disorientation, the moment when what was trusted no longer holds. Here, that question did not echo from words, but from exposed earth itself. Repairs would follow. Barriers would be placed. The surface would be restored. But restoration cannot erase awareness. Once the ground reveals its emptiness, it changes how everything above it is perceived. This was not a disaster that demanded panic. It demanded reflection. Because the most unsettling realization was not that the ground collapsed, but that it had been hollow long before anyone dared to look. If this moment made you pause and reflect, feel free to leave a comment with your thoughts. And if you want to keep following the signs as they continue to unfold, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. It began without thunder or warning, because this invasion did not fall from the sky or rise from the ground, but rolled in quietly, carried by wind and neglect. In a California town accustomed to controlling its streets and borders, something ancient and indifferent arrived, not as a storm, but as movement that would not stop. Massive waves of tumbleweeds poured into residential neighborhoods, piling against homes, fences, and vehicles as if guided by a single, relentless force. What once appeared as harmless desert plants multiplied into walls of dry mass, stacking higher with every gust, pressing forward until streets disappeared beneath tangled stems. The town did not wake to damage alone, but to obstruction so complete that even familiar paths were no longer usable. Roads that carried daily routines became impassable corridors of debris, where cars stalled and emergency access narrowed to uncertainty. Side streets vanished first, then main roads followed, as movement slowed and finally ceased altogether. Daily life did not adapt to the invasion. It stopped, because the town was not built to resist something that advanced without regard for rules or boundaries. What unsettled residents most was not only the scale, but the helplessness. These were not machines to shut down or crowds to redirect, but living matter responding only to wind and gravity. Attempts to clear one area only redirected the mass elsewhere, creating a cycle that felt endless and futile. Control slipped away not through force, but through persistence. The scene felt less like cleanup and more like surrender, as wild vegetation crossed into spaces carefully organized by human planning. Lawns, sidewalks, and driveways lost distinction, swallowed into a single chaotic surface. The separation between cultivated land and wilderness dissolved, revealing how thin that line truly is when nature chooses to cross it. This was not destruction by fire or flood, but by accumulation, a slow suffocation of order beneath organic weight. The tumbleweeds did not attack structures directly, yet they rendered them useless, proving that collapse does not always require violence. Sometimes it only requires volume, patience, and the absence of restraint. From above, the image was unsettling. Neighborhoods looked overtaken rather than damaged, as if the land itself had decided to reclaim what had been borrowed. The town appeared paused in time, encased in dry growth that did not belong and could not be reasoned with. It was nature not raging, but advancing. The deeper unease came from recognition. Tumbleweeds spread because conditions allow them to. Because land dries, winds strengthen, and systems weaken without immediate consequence. Their arrival was not sudden in origin, only sudden in visibility. As crews worked to clear the streets, the question lingered beneath the labor. If something so simple could paralyze a town, what else has been quietly gathering strength beyond the edges of control? The tumbleweeds did not speak, threaten, or explain themselves. Yet their presence delivered a message written in obstruction. Nature did not reclaim the town in a single moment. It rolled in steadily, filled the gaps, and waited until there was no space left to ignore it. Across multiple states in the United States, an illness once thought buried by modern medicine resurfaced with unsettling force, catching communities off guard as numbers rose faster than reassurance. The country recorded its highest measles count in modern history, a distinction no region expects to claim in the 21st century. Cases climbed relentlessly until the total reached 789, with dozens added in the span of days, turning what might have been dismissed as isolated infection into a sustained outbreak. The pace itself became alarming, not because it exploded in a single moment, but because it refused to slow. This surge surpassed previous national records, making it the largest outbreak since measles was declared eliminated nationwide 25 years ago. That declaration once symbolized progress and security, yet its reversal exposed how fragile those achievements can be when vigilance weakens. The past did not remain buried. It returned. Transmission first concentrated within specific communities before rippling outward across state lines. Health officials traced early cases to close-knit populations, yet the virus did not recognize origin, border, or identity. What allowed it to accelerate was not movement alone, but gaps in immunity that had quietly expanded over time. Low vaccination rates created open pathways the disease could exploit, turning personal decisions into collective vulnerability. Measles, highly contagious and unforgiving, moved efficiently through those gaps, exposing how quickly protection collapses when participation declines. The outbreak did not depend on mutation or novelty. It relied on absence. Authorities urged containment and vaccination, warning that further spread remained possible as long as exposure continued. No deaths had been reported, yet the lack of fatalities offered little comfort. Survival did not equal safety, and the deeper concern lay in how easily control had been lost. This crisis unfolded without spectacle. There were no collapsed buildings or burning skylines, only clinics filling, numbers climbing, and parents watching symptoms with fear rather than certainty. The invisibility of the threat made it more unsettling, because it proved that devastation does not always announce itself with force. Many could not ignore the echo of Matthew 24:7, where Scripture warns that pestilences would arise not as endings, but as beginnings of birth pains. The verse assigns no dates and demands no panic. It describes a pattern, disease appearing where it should not, spreading where defenses once stood firm, signaling strain rather than conclusion. The outbreak did not declare judgment, yet it demanded attention. It exposed reliance on systems assumed to be permanent and revealed how quickly protection can unravel when trust replaces action. Across the United States, measles did not return as a mystery. It returned as a reminder. What made this moment unsettling was not death, but reversal. A disease defeated by knowledge resurfaced through neglect, proving that progress does not defend itself. And as the numbers rose, so did the question left hanging in the air, asking not how this happened, but how easily it was allowed to happen at all. It began with movement that felt out of place. Not one animal, but many creatures shaped by forest, hillside, and silence, appearing where they were never meant to be seen. In a western state, wildlife drifted into human space as if pushed forward by something unseen, carrying with them the sense that familiar boundaries were no longer holding. Deer crossed busy roads at unusual hours. Coyotes lingered near neighborhoods instead of retreating at dawn. Bears were spotted near residential edges, rummaging where they once avoided light and noise. Even smaller animals, foxes, raccoons, birds abandoning established nesting ground, shifted their patterns, moving closer to people instead of away from them. The pattern was not aggression, but displacement. Among these sightings was a mountain lion, briefly passing through residential streets. It did not hunt or charge. It moved calmly, almost cautiously, before being removed by authorities. The animal itself was not the focus. It was one sign among many another, indicator that something was pressing wildlife out of places they had occupied for generations. These were not random wanderings. Animals do not abandon territory without reason. Habitat loss, environmental pressure, shrinking resources, and constant disruption gradually push them forward. What appeared sudden to people had likely been building quietly for years. The land changed. This was not wilderness spilling accidentally into civilization. It was retreat, meeting resistance. Forests narrowed, corridors disappeared, silence fractured. The wild did not expand, it was compressed. When animals entered human space, it was not curiosity. It was necessity. Authorities responded where sightings occurred, guiding, relocating, tranquilizing when required. The responses were measured, controlled, and effective. Yet the deeper unease remained, because removing an animal does not remove the reason it arrived. No one was harmed, but concern spread quickly. The absence of violence did not ease tension. Seeing creatures adapted to distance and caution appear so openly raised questions that safety measures could not fully answer. Why now? Why here? Why so often? This was not nature asking permission. It did not wait at the edges. It moved inward, quietly, but persistently, revealing how fragile separation has become. The lines between human order and natural survival blurred, not by collapse, but by pressure. The animals eventually vanished from sight, guided back or driven farther away. Streets returned to routine, but the signal remained. Because when many species begin leaving the places meant to sustain them, it suggests not coincidence, but imbalance. This was not a warning delivered with noise or force. It arrived through footsteps, tracks, and shadows where they did not belong. And it left behind a question harder to remove than any animal. What is changing beneath the surface that keeps pushing the wild closer to the center? If this moment made you pause, tap like, and stay alert. This time, the fire didn't erupt as an isolated accident, because it appeared in sequence, rhythm, and with timing that seemed more deliberate than random, forcing attention before an explanation could come. At one factory, flames consumed a wood processing plant at a terrifying speed, as dry materials, industrial heat, and wind combined to create an inexplicable blaze once it ignited. Thick smoke rose into the sky more as a signal than a byproduct, darkening the daytime and transforming the familiar industrial area into a scene more like a battlefield than a workplace. Fire crews battled the blaze from multiple directions, but the fire seemed to have determined the outcome before firefighters could react. While the nation watched that fire extinguish itself, another blaze erupted in the far west, not nearby, geographically unrelated, but close enough in time to feel connected by something less tangible. In other states, an oil refinery blazed fiercely, creating massive columns of fire and smoke in the air above a city accustomed to disaster, but never truly prepared for it. The brilliant light spread across the night sky, reflecting off buildings and clouds, staining the horizon red in a way that made even those who thought they had seen everything before feel uneasy. The distance between these two locations should have created an emotional separation. But the rapid succession erased that comfort, because as destruction repeats itself relentlessly, the mind stops asking how and begins asking why. Thousands of miles mean nothing when the images look the same, when the colors of the sky match, and when the feeling spreads across the screen with the same weight. The fire no longer feels localized, limited, or isolated, but becomes regular. From above, the devastation looks almost deliberate, as aerial footage shows burning areas sharply cut into the landscape, glowing in the darkness like open wounds. These are not small fires that extinguish themselves, but prolonged events requiring large-scale responses, extended lockdowns, and public warnings. The very air becomes hostile, thick with smoke, forcing people indoors, while sirens and warnings replace normal sounds. What worries many observers is not only the scale, but also the timing, because as soon as one fire subsides and dies down, another erupts, leaving no one time to recover psychologically or realistically. Fire followed fire, pressure followed pressure, and the sense of sequence became increasingly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence. The question gradually shifted from what had failed to whether something was being exposed. The Bible has long viewed fire as more than just material destruction, and Isaiah 30-27:30 describes fire, smoke, and burning not only as instruments of destruction, but also as signs that disrupt complacency. Within that framework, fire appears to reveal, to confront, and to warn, forcing recognition rather than offering comfort. It is not chaos in itself, but a signal that something has reached its limit. In these events, fire doesn't speak in words, but it communicates through repetition, through intensity, and through scope, touching industries, cities, and attention all at once. It incinerates material, shuts down systems, and shakes assumptions about control, safety, and distance.